Hey everyone, welcome back to another game analysis of my tournament in Germany. This is round 8. Coming back from last round, we had a really tough loss against Christian Gluma, a 2000 rated opponent. So I need a bounce back, having 4 out of 7 coming back into this 8th round. And then I got paired against a 13-year-old 2000 rated FIDE opponent. Wow. Tom Dordevic is his name, and he had the black pieces against my white pieces. With the black pieces against e4, he plays 2 types of things. He plays c5 with the object to go into a Sicilian, such as like this, and then I go d4, and this is called like the Sicilian con, right, with e6 here. And he also goes with Caro-Kann, so c6 on move 1. And so then we go into the game, my opponent goes c5, I go knight here, and he goes d6. So again, a time where I prepared against my opponent and they just played something that I didn't know existed that they played. This is not in their chess-based database, but it is online. It is on Chess24. If you go and watch, you see your opponent's games that were live in the past year. He told me this after the round. I had no idea this existed. But anyways, apparently he adopted the Najdorf, or the Najdorf, sorry, I say that word wrong. He adopted the Najdorf in this year, in this past year. So d4 takes and knight takes, and he goes with knight f6. Now, he played this at an exceptional speed, okay? He was basically bulleting this opening, which was crazy to me because it told me that he prepared against my play on chess.com by going to a website that's called Opening Tree, in which he just stalks my chess.com profile and then sees all of my games and what I play the most. So here he had prepared all morning against exactly what I play, and so we just go into theory. This is all theory. He dives into this and literally plays super confidently, like aggressive, okay? It was very scary. He was 13 and he was just like pressing the clock all the time. So castles, and then I go castles long, and now we have a full-on Najdorf Sicilian in which castles are opposite side, and white aims to attack the black king with their pawns, and black aims to attack the white king with their pawns. This is called opposite side castling, and is a very interesting theme in chess because it makes for attacking games. Knight d7 is played, and then I go g4. He told me after the game that on my chess.com what I play 5 times more with this position than usually is king b1. I always go king b1, he tells me, and he prepared all morning against king b1, which is bad. And I go and I play g4, which I don't normally do. I didn't know that I don't normally do this. I go g4, which is the main line, and this surprised him. My faultiness surprised him. b5 is played, and now I go g5. The idea of this pawn scaling up super fast, usually with the white pieces in a, let's say, dragon Sicilian, in which black has a fianchetto bishop on g7, I would go for h4, h5, g5. g5 in something like the dragon is not that good because knight h5 just blocks both pawns. But the idea in this Sicilian is that you want to ambitiously kick this knight super early on, and now the knight is off of d5, and that is the idea. That's why I played my pawn so fast, because this pawn is also streamlining the board to attack my knight to get it off of d5. And so once this knight is off of d5, now my knight can go onto d5 with a comfortable presence in the center. And now I go h4, kind of a fast move. And I didn't realize that h4 gave what it gave in the game. I was just like, this is the typical move that I play in the Sicilian, you know, push your pawns up against the king. The faultiness of this h4 move is that this pawn does not take up g3 anymore. And this is a vital square for this knight. And he goes knight g3, attacking both my bishop and my rook, mainly winning my bishop pair. And so I play rook takes. And what this does is that my bishop that was once on f1 very nicely was taking up the c4 square is not doing that anymore. Even though it was an undeveloped, lonely piece on f1, it was doing a great job of taking up c4 here. Why? Because now knight b6 comes in and threatens c4 to then fork both my pieces and win my really good bishop on e3. Like this bishop is amazing. Imagine, I want to keep my bishop on f1 to target c4 to keep my bishop on e3. So my bishop on e3 is like the treasure chest of my position here. And so this knight b6 arrives, and I'm really confronted with two choices. Now, the engine will spit in your face and tell you like f4 is the best move here, and don't think twice because it's small advantage for white, but knight c4 is really coming in. And this begs the question, do I give up my crown jewel, the bishop, on e3 to this knight on b6? And it would look kind of like this. So bishop takes, queen takes, and then like knight d5, and then bishop takes, and something like queen takes here. Second option is to go knight a5 and take up this c4 square, solely to play against this knight. That's the only thing. And the second this knight plays here, we're very happy that we keep our bishop on e3. This knight a5 move demands a lot of work because there's variations for black that look very, very sharp. And after 15 minutes of a turn here, I took 15 minutes. By the way, my opponent infamously has an hour and 35 minutes on the clock. I'm saying this because we start the game with an hour and 30 minutes each. And so there's a 30-second bump every time you play. And just to show you how much my opponent didn't take time on their clock so far in the game, guy had an hour 35. So was playing instantaneously for the first 13 moves of this game. Crazy. And now I take a 15-minute turn and I have a huge deficit in time versus my opponent. I play knight a5. So I play knight a5, okay? Knight a5 is really risky because it gives b4. And that was the idea of this knight on b6 too, to cover the d5 square to prevent my knight to go to d5. So knight d5, I didn't like this line because of knight takes, pawn takes, and then maybe like, oh wait, takes. But thankfully, after b4, I have knight c6. And that is a new resource because the knight is newly on a5. And here I at least win the pawn, but the engine always comes up with something cool. And so after queen d7, there's actually knight d5, which is better. And here you cannot take my knight because I take your bishop and fork your two major pieces. And so if you take here now, I just get a really nice knight on c6 and overall an amazing position. So b4 is not available now, but now my opponent plays rook c8, which I had obviously had to calculate before playing knight a5 because it's pretty forced and it's again threatening b4 with no knight c6 this time. So I go a3, having calculated this, and I had to also calculate d5. And that was the opportunity cost of going into knight a5, which was played. This is absolutely played. d5 is kind of the upswing of what I have to face here because it looks like such a nice move. I can't take too many times on d5 because it looks really ugly after a while, after the bishop takes, and my knight is just imprisoned and trapped on a5. It's just a knight that's on the rim. The b4 is coming in, pressuring a3. This rook is super nicely opened, x-raying my king. I really don't like this position, but on d5, which I had calculated before playing knight a5, because it's still part of this line that's almost forced till now, I came up with bishop takes b6, which I was like, it's easy, right? I'm taking up the defender of the d5 pawn, and I'm taking away a second defender in the queen of the d5 pawn as well. And after knight takes, bishop takes, and I thought I was fine after b4, which attacks my knight. I really had to see in the future and then calculate once I was in the future. This is all played, all thought of before knight a5. Like, this is crazy. And I was like, b4 is so strong, it attacks a3 and it cuts my queen's defense off my knight on a5. But here I was like, of course I have knight c6. I have knight c6, forking the bishop and the pawn, and once the bishop moves, I can just take this pawn and the white pieces are completely fine. By the way, finding knight c6 took me like 3 tries of literally trying the variation and like saying to myself, I have nothing, because I was trying to convince myself that knight a5 was the right move originally. So this needs to be taken into account 9 moves in, 9 individual moves in. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. I'm also getting numb in the foot, Rev. Okay. Yes, guy is going. Okay, he's going, he's gone. Though here, I get absolutely punished by my opponent who outcalculated me, 13 years old, outcalculated me here and did not go for b4, which still wins because of what resources here, but he comes up with something that's just completely losing for me. And that is the move bishop c5. And in this position, I freeze. In fact, I freeze for 2 minutes and then I start going red because I'm about to resign. This bishop threatens my rook and threatens to go to e3 to win my queen by pinning it to my king. This double threat is so strong, I have no rook move, so moving this rook that's attacked to defend this square. I was on the cusp of resigning here, and this is why this game is about resilience over the board at chess. Because it's so easy to give up on yourself. It's so easy to put your head down and just stop playing, give up the game. But in this position, after so much hard work, I find the only move that salvages a little bit of remain of my position. And that is the desperate move queen e1. I just want to say, queen g2 to defend the rook, other moves like this, just give the knight outright because the queen is off of d2 and you just give the knight. Same for queen here, you're not giving the full rook, right? But then you're just giving the knight here. And don't forget that on b4, attacking both pieces here, like this, then there's queen a3 check. And black can get out of this super easily by just taking all the pawns. So it was really tough, and I found queen e1, defending my knight and still defending my rook, so that after bishop takes, rook takes, this is still okay. I'm still hanging on desperately to like a rope, like I'm hanging on for my life. And what is up here? I have a pawn and a knight for a rook. Now this is better for black if they can manage to get this rook super active. If black manages to open a file, let's say the rook on the c file, the rook on the d file, the rook on the e file, these are the 3 semi-open files of the game. And if black can open up one of them, their rooks can become super strong and create a rampage on my position. And here my opponent goes for a really good plan, rook e8. The idea is to go e4 here and open up the position just by sacrificing a pawn and putting on pressure. And now I go with a move that ultimately will be so important for the rest of the game, and that is knight c6, taking up a lot of the key squares of the black position, especially this d8 square. That is a key square to attack my weak pawn on d5, and I am closing up the c file from this rook, so restricting the activity of the black pieces. Really nice move, that knight c6. It has to be desperately played. It's the only move that survives here. My opponent goes with queen c5. It's the best move here. The idea of queen c5 is kind of to put pressure on this d5 pawn, the weak pawn in this position, and then just accumulate pressure as I cannot defend this overextended bad pawn. A lot of boats come by here. And so here, this forces my queen d1 to defend d5. And now queen c4 happens. Queen c4 is an interesting move. It attacks my pawn on h4, and it hints at going to a2 with some obscure threats on my king. This is a move I have to play extremely accurately, and I found the best move here. And for this move, I was inspired by a game played by Peter Lecco versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave from France, in which MVL made a positional sack on a4, and then the game went into a crazy turbulence in which both players missed the defensive resource after a while, rook h4. And in this position, rook h4 would have been the only winning horizontal move to defend this knight and win the game for Peter Lecco, and he missed it. And I saw this first in the Mastering Positional Sacrifices book that I bought 3 weeks earlier in that Amsterdam vlog. And in this position, I was inspired by that miss, taken from the book Mastering Positional Sacrifices, which I bought in the vlog 3 weeks ago. And here I had read that early section of the book, and I came up with rook g4. Defending this pawn and horizontally against a queen threat. The same theme that was in that book. This was played in a high key event in the Olympiad in Batumi, Georgia in 2018, in which France was facing Hungary in a high-stakes 5 versus 5, where the countries clash on the 5 best players on the 5 best boards that each player gets. Crazy, crazy. Rook g4 attacking the queen, doubling down on the defense of this h4 pawn and inviting the queen to a2. Queen a2 is played, and this is really serious. I have to play the best move here. Queen a1 check is threatened to win the b2 pawn. This is a forced combination, and pretty much everything gives a small advantage to black except for c3. Now, what was better than queen c4 here was after my queen was on d5, was now breaking open an e-file with e4, because my queen does not defend e4 anymore, and now e4 gets what we said, activates a rook, opens up a file for the rook, and then on this open file I would easily see doublings of rooks and attacks on c2. The reason why queen c4 is not good is because after rook g4 there is no there's no e4 here. So after e4 I would have f takes e4, and you can't open up the file with rook takes e4, because now I have knight e7, forking the king and rook, and using this pin of the queen and rook against the black pieces. You cannot take my knight because I would just take the queen. And if the king moves to h8, I have rook takes e4 first on the queen has to take my rook, and then I take the rook with a piece up.
Hey, you're Zag from YouTube.
You know me?
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I'm filming a recap video.
Yeah, I saw it, man.
How did you find me here?
Just passing by. Yeah.
Checkmate. Hi.
Nice to meet you. You know each other?
Yeah, they're my dad.
Oh, it's your dad? Yeah, I was just filming a little thing for YouTube.
Okay.
Nice to meet you both. Yeah, you guys are biking?
Yeah, we Scott wanted to see the nice house there. It's a nice.
There's a nice house there?
Yeah, there's a very nice house from the aristocracy.
Oh, really?
Aristocracy. So he wanted to see that.
Oh, wow. Well, funny bumping into you both. This will go on the YouTube video.
Yeah.
So maybe you could chat. I will. You want to chat with each other? I will go with. Or yeah, if you want to.
Hi again, a fan ran into me and I had to pause the video because the battery exhausted there, but we are back in my university this time, analyzing from the same position. So I went from rook g4 and the inspiration struck and my opponent committed to the act. Queen a2 played on the board, threatening queen a1, and now my move c3 is so nice because if, let's say, rook c7 to go to d7 to attack, well, now I have king c2 taking up the a1 square and looking to trap the queen. You do not come in time to attack my pawn, and this is the make or break of the variation because I have a knight b4 trapping the queen and winning the game. Insane, all because of the rook g4. Really nice. And there's also another variation here with a5 taking up the b4 square and threatening rook d7 to win the pawn here on d5. But here I can just take the pawn, and if rook d7 now I can break the connection of the queen and the rook on d5 by playing knight b3. After the two rooks double up, I didn't see this. I saw up till here and I thought this is fine for white. But if the rooks double up on the d file, now I can go queen e2. And when the rook takes, I go rook g1. The engine found this, of course. But rook g1 threatening rook a1 to win the queen. And my opponent in the analysis said, okay, but I can just play like g6, let's say. And then I said, okay, rook a2, rook d2. Taking my knight off the defense of the rook, and after queen takes, this is pretty even because I have two pawns and a knight for the rook, and I'm fine. So really cool and complicated variation. All of this made my opponent play queen a1 check and swipe the queens off the board. Now, here he goes directly for rook c7. He played this fairly quickly, aiming directly at my d5 pawn. If there's no knight on c6 taking up this d8 square, I am cooked because any rook to d8 wins this pawn. That's super feeble and overextended. But because of this knight taking that square, the rook has to circumvent the d8 square and go to d7, and now I can just play b3, rook d7, Oh, rook d7 wasn't played, but I come in time basically. If rook d7, I go c4 and I can just defend, not that way. I can just defend my pawn the best way possible by having, by having perfect pawn chain. And so that's what I did. I played king d2 first, and after rook c8, then I go for c4, and then we trade. And now I have two connected passed pawns, defending my knight. I'm still just a pawn and a knight for a rook, but here it looks so promising because the rook's activity is so reduced. I mean, what are the rooks doing? Because I gave an open file, there is chances for the black pieces, but they need to capitalize on the rook b7 things, and this is what they do. He goes for f6 first. I don't like rook here first because I'm just winning the pawn, right? And so that's the object of f6, to defend the pawn first. I go king c3 and then rook b7. Rook b7 is annoying. It takes up kind of this b1 square, aims for that, and then black will just really interestingly attack all my weak pawns from the back end. I don't want this, obviously. So I go with rook g1. Rook g1 just takes up the b1 square and is an excuse for my rook to just circumvent and attack other premises. My rook's job is done here. What's really nice to observe earlier on is that black really can't play this 4-on-3 that they have with their pawns because somehow my pawns are so nicely placed. If f5 is played, I just take and this is completely pinned. And if h5 is played, then I just take and this is also completely pinned. So it was really fortunate, I would say, because I didn't control any of this, but the position just played itself. It was just so easy to play this, and I had such a fun time playing this. So rook b6 is played. It's really annoying. Again, my opponent is just trying to play annoyingly. If I go for c5, attacking the rook, there's rook b5 here, attacking my pawn and forcing my king to defend my pawn with king c4, which gives up this c2 square, and then the same type of resource, the rook goes into my position and attacks my pawns from the back end, which would not be favorable. So I go for a very patient rook d1, and this is pretty prophylactic, meaning I'm seeing my opponent's resource and I'm playing against that, preventing the opponent before the attack is meant. And let's say a move like, what was played? No, okay. Let's say a move like, I don't know, a nothing move. I don't know, a nothing move like rook b7. Let's say the rook is still on b6. Now I can go c5, and then after rook b5 attacking, king c4, and then rook b2, I have something special in my toolkit. I have d6 here, sacking my knight, and now because my rook is backing this pawn, I can go d7, threatening d8, and in this variation, because my rook is here, there is no king e7 to block that promotion. And here this is winning for white. So I was threatening this c5 move here. And so my opponent goes for a preventative rook e8, and now 35 moves in, bonus time in 5 minutes, I go with f5, a really surprise move that is really good. And it's not good for the reasons I played it. I played this really impulsively in the game, a bit too impulsively, but this is the idea. On e takes f4, I was thinking I would go rook e1 check on the king first, forcing the king either to d7 or to these f squares, which, bringing the king away from connected pass pawns is not the best. You want a king to defend against pass pawns. That's how it's done. So the king d7 is like the most valid option. And here I would go takes. At the minimum, I recuperate a pawn on f4, the pawn that I gave, with isolated pawn on f6. But I had this idea, c5 here, attacking the rook and making a mating net for this king so that if the rook moves, let's say rook b5, then I have checkmate on e7. Beautiful, I know. Though the engine just says, okay, but I can just sack back the rook. And my opponent in the analysis agreed with some of these notions that sacrificing the rook against the knight and pawn earlier on, even earlier than this, would have been way better. For me, if he would have done that earlier, it would have just resulted in a draw, right? On takes check and one of the king f moves, so let's say king f7, I just liked at least rook e7 or something like rook f1. At the very least, I can just recuperate the pawn. But the idea is overall not that good. I don't want to open up files, right, as I said previously. But yeah, after f4, a surprising move by me. Rook takes c6, a surprising move by my opponent. Rook takes c6 was played, I took, and then takes. And now we transpose this into a rook endgame, an equal rook endgame in which I have a passed pawn on c4, my opponent has a passed pawn on e5, or technically not yet, but it's an extra pawn on this king side. This is a bit favorable, slight advantage for white. And so now I realize I have at least a draw in the bag. Coming from all the way back in the game, a draw would have never been in my thoughts. I was completely losing, even let's say before that queen e1 move. I was 2 seconds away from resigning. I was so close to resigning, because if I don't find queen e1, I'm down a rook, or I'm down a full knight, and it's impossible to get back up from there at this level. This is the realization that I'm at least drawing this game. It's such a fun feeling. I have f takes e5, weakening this pawn in the center, and then rook d5, what a move, to attack this pawn, and not rook e1, because rook e1, the rook defends, and it's more tough to win this pawn. Rook d5 still gives a chance for my king to come to e4 to win this pawn here. So rook d5 attracts the rook to defend. If you go e4, I have check, winning the pawn by force, so you have to defend with the rook. And then I would just bring my king in, and this would win a pawn in a rook endgame, would be pretty close to winning. But we were both on time pressure before move 30, and I would say that these moves were played pretty quickly. We had below 10 minutes each. So I go rook e1, pretty fast. I play this move extremely fast, actually, like 30 seconds. Attacking this pawn twice and forcing a move, which is what I liked. Rook e6, and then I played c5 very quickly. Again, here this takes is better because I weakened this pawn, and my king's superiority in advancement on the board, so my king being more centralized than this king on e8, is a major advantage when trying to grab this pawn over this pawn for them in this position. So huge source of potential advantage. So I go c5. c5 draws, again, the engine knows exactly when I draw or win. c5 is less good because it allows for e4, and I guess something like f5, and the pawn on e4 is set in stone, and the second that this king gets back up, then it's like a very equal endgame. So e4 wasn't played though. My opponent played what I thought they would play, king d7, the natural, more intuitive move to bring the king up in the endgame. And after f5, which is what I love to play, it diminishes this rook, makes it passive. Then I go for check, and now king c6. And in this moment in the endgame, a super important idea comes to mind. I could keep this pawn and try to convert by the likes of rook d6 check, or something like this. Like, you know, king c4, defend it, rook d6 check, and then just try to push the pawn and slam the black pieces. Or I could substitute this quite weak pawn on c5 for this pawn, creating an outside pass pawn on the a file to just have that type of advantage, right? So I play rook d6 here. There's also the option of taking here on f6 and then playing rook d6. I still enjoyed rook d6 here and taking this pawn, because this pawn is such an outside pass pawn, it will have to attract either this king or rook to the presence of this pawn, to which I can concentrate my pieces on this winning majority or pressure here. So rook c7, this is just like a trick move. I don't like this. It's not good in principle. It just has tricks, right? Black is threatening to check my king and discover check on my rook to win the rook. So I just played king d3, the very natural move, to go to this delicious square. And now black has to play accurately. They have 4 moves that are pretty drawful, and this was the least good one. But king d5. King d5 needs to be played, and on check, rook c5 needs to be found, and this is a draw somehow. I can't believe it. Oh, yeah, okay. So I go h5 to try to go for h6 to get a breakthrough, and then my opponent finds h6, and this should be a draw. So g6, king d5, king e3, king c5, king d3, and we repeat moves. But he didn't find this. He played rook f7, and now this rook is extremely passive, giving me this e4 square for my king. And I like my position here. My pawns are very, imposing pawns. This pawn is a really good source of advantage because it will attract the king to it, as it's a super aggressive piece and its potential is really dangerous. So black needs to remove it off the board. h6 is played. This is a mistake because it allows me to weaken the pawn structures and create two weak pawns here on the king side. As long as my rook stays on the pawn on f6, this rook has to stay passively on either the f7 square or the f8 square. Not enjoyable. So now I go for rook e6, which is somewhat of a mistake. h5, the waiting move, would have been way better after king b5. Now I go rook e6, and then king a4, king d5. Similarly happened in the game, like h5 was played by my opponent, then I played a4, and then I played king d5. Here, this is a drawing mistake in this variation, but in the other line that you just saw, it was winning. The difference here is that now black has rook d7 check, and on king c6, I would have obviously liked to go to e6, but on king c6, my opponent has rook f7, the calm move. And the idea is that when my king comes back for like rook e8 and then king e6 to win this pawn, now black plays a trick on me. They play king c4. Instead, not going for my pawn, but using this rook in the future to stop my pawn, and going here with the king to make this pawn dangerous against me. Sick. So king c4, and now I would go rook e8. I have to, I'm going with my plan, right? Rook a7, king e6, and then rook a6 check, right on time. King f7, king d3, and then rook e6, rook takes a4, king takes, and then these two pawns will queen pretty much at the same time, and it will be a draw. Check did not happen. After king d5, my opponent took the pawn, and now I'm down a pawn, but advantageous because my king is up. That's how valuable having a king up the board is worth. Like, it's so good. Rook e8 here. I calculated this and I saw a line that was so nice. I was so excited to play this. Rook e8, rook b7, king e6. King e6 attacks the pawn on f6, and after rook b6, I found king f7. Also looking on to win the h5 pawn, but really just keeping an eye on the f6 pawn, even while I would go to take the h5 pawn. It's really nice. My opponent goes for king b5, and now I find the only super slam dunk winning move. Try to find it, it's pretty easy. Pause the video to solve. It is rook e6, interfering with the defense of the rook on the f6 pawn. And if you take my rook, I do not take with the king, which would be slightly less good, but I instead take with the pawn, creating a passed pawn, and my e pawn gets to a queen before your pawn, and it's completely winning. So after rook e6, my opponent goes king c5, and now I can take the free money on f6, still with the winning pawn endgame if you take. e4, a really good resource found by my opponent, using the pin against me to just get an advantage of the pawn going down the board, but here I go for the only winning move, king g5. King g5 is amazing, okay? It's twofold. If you keep the rooks on the board, I just take the pawn and I'll take this pawn and I have two pawns up in a rook endgame. It's completely winning. And your king is cut. It's like completely winning. It's over. And if after king g5 you take and your idea is to stop my pawn with your king, my king comes back into action with king f6, e3, e7. If you stop it again, king f7, and now e2, e8, queen, check, winning this pawn at once. And this works on all metrics. If you never try to stop my pawn, it just works on e8, queen, right? That's the idea of king g5, and then my opponent defended his pawn with rook b4, and now I have a super nice passed pawn. And after king d5, I go f7, king takes queens, rook b5 check, I just go back, and here after king d5, and I go queen d8 check, winning this pawn, and queen and a pawn against rook is completely winning. This is completely over. My opponent resigned, and Let me tell you, at the end of this game, I felt extremely bad for my opponent because the way it was, especially coming from my perspective, is I was completely losing and did not deserve to win this game based on my miscalculation in the middle game and not seeing that bishop c5 that's just completely winning for black. And I ended up apologizing 3 times to this guy. In true Canadian fashion, I will say, I haven't forgotten my Canadian roots here, living in the Netherlands. I felt terrible because, first of all, it's a kid. Second of all, he prepared so well against me in the Najdorf. I was out-prepped in the Najdorf, and he got a really good position out of the Najdorf, a winning position, and my position just came together with that rook g4 resource, that c3 resource with the knight b4, forcing a queen trade, and that endgame where b3 and c4 defends my pawn on d5, clutch against those rooks, and my knight on c6 just taking up everything. I won. But let me tell you, a part of me thinks I did not deserve to win given that missed bishop c5 move. Tom, if you're watching, you have an amazing potential ahead of you. You're 2000 ELO rated, FIDE ELO rated. Wow, FIDE ELO, my God, insane. And you're 13 years old only. So wonder kid in the makings, you guys. High respect to Tom Dordevic. The German adventures are coming to an end. Cheers.